Welcome to the Psychology and Physical Training channel. Have you ever wondered how we make sense of the world around us? How our brain takes in information and interprets it to form our reality? Introduction to Perception. Welcome to an exploration of perception, the incredible process through which we interpret and understand the world. This isn't just about seeing, hearing, or touching. It's about how we take these sensations and turn them into a coherent picture of reality. Every day we rely on perception to guide us. It helps us recognize the faces of our friends, navigate through bustling city streets, or appreciate the beauty of a sunset. It's a crucial part of our lives, shaping our experiences and our interactions. But how does this process work? How do our brains take raw sensory data and transform it into something meaningful? How does perception influence our understanding of the world? These are the questions we'll be exploring. So let's dive into the fascinating world of perception. Sensation versus perception. The journey of perception begins with sensation, but what's the difference between these two? Well, let's dive right into it. Imagine you're sitting in a coffee shop, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee wafting through the air. The gentle hum of chatter around you, the soft light dancing off the polished wooden tables. All of these elements are being picked up by your senses. Sight, smell, hearing, touch. This process, where your sense organs detect external events and transform those events into neural signals, is known as sensation. It's the raw data, the initial layer of experience. Picture sensation as the courier that delivers a package of information to your brain. It's the first contact your brain has with the external world. But what happens once this package arrives at your brain's doorstep? Enter perception. Once this sensory information reaches your brain, it doesn't just sit there. Your brain gets to work deciphering this information, putting the pieces together, recognizing patterns, and making sense of it all. So going back to our coffee shop scenario, your brain perceives the smell as coffee, interprets the hum as conversation, and the light as a cozy ambient setting. Perception is like the detective of your mind, interpreting the clues delivered by sensation. It's the process that allows us to understand our surroundings and interact with them meaningfully. With perception, the aroma isn't just a smell. It's the inviting scent of coffee. The hum isn't just noise, it's the comforting sound of human interaction. The light isn't just brightness, it's a warm, welcoming ambience. So sensation and perception, although interconnected, play distinct roles in how we experience the world. Sensation provides the raw material, the initial input. Perception takes this raw material and constructs a coherent, meaningful narrative, allowing us to navigate and understand our environment. Thus, while sensation is about detecting, perception is about interpreting. The two work hand in hand, forming the foundation of our conscious experience, shaping how we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch the world around us. The perceptual process. Now that we know the difference between sensation and perception, let's explore how these processes work together. Imagine a symphony orchestra. Sensations are the individual instruments, each playing its own tune. But what turns these separate sounds into a harmonious melody? That's the role of the perceptual process. This process is like the conductor of the orchestra, melding the individual sounds into a beautiful symphony of sensory information. The first stage of this process is attention. Our senses are constantly bombarded with information, but we can't process it all at once. So our brain acts like a spotlight, focusing on certain stimuli while ignoring others. This selective attention is guided by factors such as our interests, needs, and expectations. Next comes interpretation. Once we've paid attention to certain stimuli, our brain needs to make sense of it. This is where our past experiences, knowledge, and cultural background come into play. They provide the context that helps us interpret the sensory information we're receiving. Finally, we reach the stage of recognition. This is where our brain matches the interpreted sensory information to stored templates or schemas in our memory. This recognition stage allows us to identify the stimuli and understand what it is. So let's go back to our orchestra analogy. The attention stage is like the conductor deciding which instruments to focus on. The interpretation stage is like the conductor understanding the individual tunes being played. And the recognition stage is like the conductor recognizing the melody and realizing it's a piece by Mozart. This perceptual process is not a one-way street, though. It's more of a cycle. with each stage feeding information back to the previous stages. This feedback loop allows for continuous updates and refinements of our perceptions based on new sensory information. But remember, our perception is not a perfect reflection of reality. It's a constructed interpretation shaped by our attention, interpretation, and recognition. And it's this constructive nature of perception that makes it such a fascinating area of study. The perceptual process is the mind's method of understanding the world around us. Patterning and organization in perception. Our brain has a remarkable ability to find patterns and organize information. But how does this work in perception? Let's dive into the fascinating world of patterning and organization in perception. To understand this, we first need to grasp the concept of perceptual grouping. Perceptual grouping is our brain's way of making sense of the sensory information it receives. It's like a puzzle master at work, piecing together different sensory inputs to create a coherent and understandable picture. For instance, when you look at a crowd, you don't perceive every individual as separate. Instead, your brain groups them together, enabling you to perceive the crowd as a single entity. This is perceptual grouping in action. Now, to understand how our brain accomplishes this feat, we turn to the Gestalt principles. The term Gestalt is a German word that means whole or form, and these principles were developed by German psychologists who believed that our brains are wired to see structured patterns and organized forms. Let's explore a few key Gestalt principles that play a crucial role in our perception. Firstly, there's the principle of proximity. This principle suggests that objects close to each other tend to be perceived as a group. Think about a flock of birds flying together. Your brain groups them as one entity because they are close to each other. Then there's the principle of similarity. Objects that look alike are perceived as part of the same group. For example, if you see a line of red dots interspersed with a few blue dots, your brain will group the red dots together as one entity and the blue dots as another. The principle of closure is another interesting one. This principle suggests that our brain tends to fill in the gaps to complete a picture. So, if you see an image of a circle with a small part missing, your brain will still perceive it as a complete circle. Finally, there's the principle of continuity. This principle suggests that our brain prefers to see continuous patterns rather than disjointed ones. For example, if you see a line of dots, your brain will perceive them as a single continuous line rather than separate dots. These principles are just a few examples of how our brain organizes sensory information into meaningful patterns. It's a remarkable process, demonstrating the power and sophistication of our perceptual systems. So, when you look around, remember that what you're perceiving is not merely a reflection of the world as it is. Instead, it's an interpretation shaped by your brain's relentless search for patterns and organization. Therefore, our perception of the world is not just a replication of what our senses detect, but an interpretation shaped by our brain's search for patterns and organization. Implications. We've explored a lot about perception today, but why does it matter? Well, perception is the very foundation of how we understand and interact with the world. It's through perception that we make sense of the sensory information that bombards us every moment, and it's perception that shapes our responses to that information. Let's take a quick trip down memory lane. We started our journey with understanding the difference between sensation and perception. Sensation is the raw, unfiltered data we receive through our senses, while perception is the brain's interpretation of that data. It's the difference between simply hearing a sound and understanding that sound as a beautiful piece of music. Next, we delved into the perceptual process, which involves several stages. These include the reception of sensory information, the translation of that information into a form the brain can understand, and finally, the interpretation of that information based on past experiences and knowledge. Then, we examined patterning and organization in perception. Our brains are incredibly good at recognizing patterns and organizing information in a way that makes sense to us. This is why we can see a face in a random pattern of shadows or hear a melody in a series of random notes. But why is understanding perception so crucial? Its importance extends beyond just academic interest. In psychology, understanding perception is key to many therapeutic approaches. Cognitive and behavioral therapies, for instance, often involve altering a person's perception of their experiences to help them cope with mental health issues. Moreover, understanding perception can help us understand why people can have such different interpretations of the same event. It can explain why two people can look at the same painting and see completely different things. In essence, perception is the lens through which we view the world, and that lens is shaped by a multitude of factors: our past experiences, our knowledge, our expectations, and so much more. Understanding perception gives us insight into our own minds and helps us understand how we interact with the world around us. So the next time you look around, remember what you're seeing is not just the world, but your brain's interpretation of it. And if you like this video, do not forget to subscribe to the Psychology and Physical Training channel for more videos. Thanks for watching.